everybody, welcome back. It's June, so that means it's Pride Month, so I thought I'd put together a quick list of some LGBTQ+ books that I have read that I think are really good. This obviously isn't an extensive list, this is just books I have read and enjoyed, and I think the representation in them is really decent, so plenty of books here that I'm sure you've heard of and some that I'm sure you probably haven't. As I said, it's not extensive, so please drop some more recommendations below in the comments, especially if there's fantasy books, as I am primarily a fantasy book reader. I'd love to hear your thoughts on books that you've read that you think have really good representation. Without further ado, let's get going. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is Ash and also Huntress by Melinda Lowe. These books both take place in the same universe. Ash is a Cinderella retelling in which the Cinderella character Ash, her father has died and is now at the mercy of her stepmother and her stepsisters. But then when she's out one day, she meets the king's huntress Kaisa, and everything sort of goes from there. She forms a friendship and later romance with her. And Huntress is a prequel story to this, in which Kaisa tells Ash a story of these two girls from the past who saved the world from a blight and went to fairyland and all that. And Huntress is that story following those two girls and their friendship and romance that forms from them travelling together to save the world. I checked on Goodreads before I started this and I saw a lot of people didn't like Ash or were only sort of so-so on Huntress. I love Huntress. It's one that I reread again last year. I haven't had a chance to read Ash since the first time I really read it because my copy of that is out at my dad's and I haven't been out to my dad's in absolutely ages. I need to go pick it up. So I can't remember how good it is, but I do remember really enjoying it, and it is just a really interesting atmospheric retelling of the Cinderella story. Huntress as well is so sweet and so cute. I really love the romance in that, and I find the characters to be really interesting, and especially the plot of Huntress is really, really good. If you're torn between the two and you don't really know where to start, I would definitely say I think Huntress is better than Ash, but I do really enjoy both of them, but especially Huntress. Next up is Cinderella is Dead. This is a not retelling of Cinderella, but imagining what the world would be like after the original events of the story, and in this world it is mandatory for all girls once they reach 16 to attend the ball every single year, and that is how they will find their husbands, sort of in that sort of tradition born from the Cinderella story. Our main character Sophia is gay, she doesn't want to marry a man, she finds this whole ritual of women being paraded about in front of all the men to be, horrible and barbaric. She's in love with her best friend and wants to run away with her, but her friend doesn't want to. She's so caught up in this is what I have to do even though it's not what I want to do. Yeah, it's a really great story. She runs away in the middle of the ball and everything sort of goes from there. She meets this other girl who promises to help her free her friends and her best friend and stuff, and she forms a bit of a romance with her. Really good story, and very interesting, I think, to consider what happens after the fairy tale instead of just retelling it again, which is, a huge trend at the moment. It's all fairy tale retellings, it has been for a while. This is a very interesting idea to look at what happens after the original story, and perhaps things weren't quite as they were being retold, and it's definitely a story about just taking down the patriarchy. My next recommendation is The Abyss Surrounds Us. This is a story about a girl who is trainer for these sea monsters called reckoners, because in this sort of near future world they've bred these reckoners to protect ships and to protect cruise ships and stuff, because the waters are pirate infested really, and our main character is a trainer for one of these reckoners, and having gone on her first solo mission as the head trainer of the reckoner that she has helped to raise, she gets attacked by pirates and kidnapped, and they keep her to raise and train this reckoner pup that they have gotten hold of for their ship, and everything goes from there. Our main character Cassandra is sort of paired up with one of the captain's sort of prodigies called Swift, and a bit of a romance starts to form between the two of them. Before you say, but Mary, that's a prisoner and prison keeper relationship dynamic. That's not healthy, Mary. It is addressed. It is a huge plot point about equal footing, and it is one of the few times I've really seen it done. And the relationship is cute once it, gets going, and once they sort of find that balance. It's a duology, and I really like this book. It's not one I see talked about all that often, but it's really good. As I said, that idea about the power dynamic is addressed, and it's not just swept under the rug. They do realise, even though they are starting to have feelings for one another, that it's not right to start anything because of it. And yeah, it's really good fun as well. Like, it's, you know, it's a pirate story. It's about this girl Cassandra really finding out that there's more to the pirates and their way of life and their culture than she's been led to believe. And even things about her own home life aren't quite as what they seem. And all the characters are really interesting. You meet lots of them, and even though the focus is on Cassandra and Swift, they are all quite well rounded and well developed, and it's one thing I really liked about this book series. Up next is Burn by Patrick Ness. This is a alternate world where everything's basically the same, except there are dragons who live in their own communities and cultures, but some of them are available for hire. And the main character Sarah and her father hire a dragon to help them out on their farm, and when he arrives he seems very intent on protecting Sarah and befriending her, and as she begins to talk to this dragon and understand more about him, she understands that there is a prophecy that may or may not involve her, and everything sort of goes from there. The world building of this is so cool because it's, you know, it's everything the same, but then there's dragons, so there's very much asking that question of how would this world form around that, and obviously and I think the most interesting way that comes out is in this almost worshipping cult of these people that love dragons and worship them and see them as gods and stuff, and the second main character is an assassin sent to kill whoever is to be the subject of this prophecy, and he's a member of this cult. And yeah, it's just a really, really good book. It's classic Patrick Ness, so obviously there's a gay male-male romance. The whole story just does not go in the way you think it's going to go. It's set in 1957, so it's in the sort of height of the Cold War in America. It's refreshingly bizarre, is how I would describe Patrick Ness's books. They're so weird and never go in the direction you expect them to go in. So be warned, you're not going to get what you think you will get with this book, but it is still fantastic, and I think it sort of flew under the radar a bit just because it got released just as pandemic was kicking off and stuff last year. I think a lot of people missed out on it. It's a very, very good book. I really enjoy it. On the same note, Patrick Ness obviously does write a lot of gay books, so if you're looking for more MLM, I would recommend More Than This, which is about a boy who drowns but then wakes up and finds himself in this new strange place, and he's not sure if he's dead or if he's survived or what's going on. And it's really weird, but again, really, really very good. Not nearly as weird as Burn though, but again, very good. And Release as well is about a boy who is gay in sort of Southern America, highly Christian father, and all the sort of stories around that. I'm sure you can kind of guess what it's all really about. It's about him coming to terms with that and trying to find a way out of his small town, whilst there's also ghosts and some sinister sort of magic going on in the background. Again, classic Patrick Ness. It's weird, it's bizarre, but it's refreshing, and it's always really well written. Next up is The Binding. This is one of just my favourite books, if only for that cover. It's set in a sort of 19th century-ish England, although the setting's never really explained properly as to when or where it's set, and it's the same with our other book, The Portrayals, but that's kind of what I like about it. And in this world, everything's basically the same, except books are not works of fiction, but instead memories that people have wanted to get rid of, so they'll go to the bookbinder and they will bind their memory into a book, and then that person will no longer have any recollection of that memory or having gone to the bookbinder in the first place. And usually it's for quite traumatic and painful memories that they just can't cope with anymore. But one thing I really love about this book is how she interweaves this idea of books or memories into the very culture and into the world itself, you know, so you do see that there are people who abuse this ability to erase people's memories. It's used against other people. Some people will try to sell their memories if they're out on the street and are needing money. They'll approach the bookbinders and say, I will give you my memories if you pay me or something. And that sort of tragedy of almost like prostitution, but of your memories and who you are as a person, which is just an interesting aspect that I think is really well worked into. And you follow this boy called Emmett Farmer, who is sort of suffering from just mental lapses, and he's not well, so he gets sent to go live with the bookbinder and become the bookbinder's apprentice. And he sort of starts to get better, but then everything changes when this boy called Lucian Darnay turns up, who seems to be able to recognise Emmett, although Emmett has no recollection of ever meeting this man before. And everything goes from there. It's a really great book. You can kind of guess that this is in an LGBTQ+ list, and there's two boys mentioned as to kind of where it goes, but it's really well written, and it's just a really interesting world, as I said, about the whole way that the books are interwoven into the culture and how some people use it and some people abuse it. And yeah, it's a really, really good book. I'm not sure how many people have read this because I'm fairly sure lots of people have read it, but I don't see too many people talk about it, which is a shame because I really love this and I also really love her other book, The Betrayals, so I do highly recommend this. It's a really, really interesting concept. It's next one you've probably heard of, but Starless You, Erin Morgenstern. Confusing but magical is how I describe her books, really. This one is about a boy called Zachary who is reading some books in the library one day and then comes across one that has a chapter that describes in detail something that happened to him as a kid that he's never told anyone about. So he goes on this journey to follow these clues to try and find out where this book came from, how the hell it knew about that. If that story is true, then what about all the other chapters? What do all they mean? And everything really just goes from there. It's such a good book. It's so weird because all the sort of, you're almost reading a book within a book, because the book that he takes out, Sweet Sorrows, you read the chapters of that, sort of every alternate chapter almost, and then there's also these other couple of books that you then also read. And you start off just being like, okay, where's this going? What's all these little extra stories about? And then they all start to interweave and make sense and be part of Zachary's story and are metaphors for things that happen later and stuff. And it's so weird, but it's so good. And when I first read this book, I hadn't read The Night Circus, so I had no idea what to expect from this. This was my first Erin Morgenstern book, and it blew my mind. I'm not even exaggerating. I remember sitting here just being like, because it's just so good. Does the ending make sense? No. Do I reread it all the time? Absolutely, because you just pick up so much more just every single time you go past it. It's just so good. So good. Very much recommend, and yeah, so pretty as well. Next up is the Imperium trilogy. This follows two queens separated by 1,000 years, the Blood Queen and the Sun Queen, and they were prophesied to rise, with the Blood Queen destined to destroy the world and the Sun Queen destined to save it. It's not the most amazing book series I've ever read, but I do really enjoy it, and I enjoy the things that it explores, and both characters are very interesting to follow, because you follow Riel on her, and the Blood Queen on her villain arc, and then you follow Eliana, the Sun Queen, on her coming into her powers and realising that she has a bigger part to play in this world than she perhaps would have liked. Plenty of things that I like about it, plenty of things I don't like about it, but both these girls are bisexual, and this is explored and shown, it's not just told. And you know, sexuality and sex and things are definitely huge themes in this book. It's perhaps on the more new adult side of things than YA, so if you're not really into graphic sex scenes, this really isn't for you, because there are quite a few of those. But yeah, if you like that sort of stuff, if you're a big Sarah J Maas fan, you'll probably like this. And it is just a really rich world that is well established, and I do really like the concept of following both of them and seeing them sort of 1,000 years apart, but how Riel's actions as you lead them then influence Eliana in the future, and perhaps stuff that she does will maybe ripple back or something. You know, there's some stuff about time travel in here, it's a bit interesting. But yeah, it is something that I do really enjoy, and as I said, they are both bisexual. Next up is Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. This follows Monty, who is the definition of bisexual disaster, as he goes on his grand tour with his best friend Percy and his sister Felicity, and he may or may not be a little in love with his best friend. Shenanigans ensue. It's really fun, it's ridiculous, it's so... just shit happens to them, they find themselves in just the weirdest situations, mostly because Monty's kind of, as I said, a complete disaster, so he just gets them into all sorts of scrapes that they have to then get out of, and they end up being chased down by these people, and there's pirates, and it's such good fun. As I said, Monty is bisexual. Again, this is shown and not just implied. You do definitely get that feeling that he is definitely bisexual. And it's just such good fun. All three characters are really great. And I've said fun so many times. It's just such a fun book. I really loved it when I read it last year. And the next book is Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy, which then follows Felicity. And I haven't read it yet. This is on my TBR, but I am very much looking forward to reading it, because it was just a really fun book, really fun series, and I'm definitely interested to see where it goes next. Next up is Alatsue by Darcy Little Badger. This is a book set in an alternate world where everything's the same. God, this is like the third book where it's like everything's the same, but magic is real. Just sort of, and it's all from like old sort of indigenous folklores and stuff, so you've got like Irish and Celtic mythology, and you've also got indigenous American mythology and stuff that's all real, which is a really interesting concept. And you follow Elatsue, who is Leaping Apache and has the ability to raise the spirits of dead animals. She and her family and her best friend go to investigate the death of her cousin, who everyone believed to have died in an accident, but his ghost appeared to Ellie before he died, and he told her that he was being murdered and it wasn't an accident. So it's up to Ellie to prove this to the local authorities and to everybody else. Elatsue is asexual, and this is brought up, it is said, but it also isn't just the defining focus of the story, which is what I personally quite like to read about. I quite like it when it's just there and it's normalised and it's not seen as anything other, which this book definitely does. And this book is just really great. You've got Leaping Apache representation, and you hear all these stories of her 6th great grandmother and how they're relevant to then their investigation now, and Ellie's own power. I love her friendship with Jay, who is another character that you meet, and I love how it's not just her and her friend off doing it, her family, her parents are also there helping out and doing their part of the investigation, which quite often for YA sort of books you don't see, you know, often the parents are just kind of off to one side, but I like that they're actively included here. And the magic's just so cool, and the way it sort of all is interwoven into the worlds is very interesting, and yeah, it's just spooky without being scary because there's ghosts and stuff, and it's just really, really good. Next up is Summerbird Blue by Kemi Dawn Bowman. This is a story about a girl whose sister dies in an accident, and her mother sent her to stay with her aunt in Hawaii whilst the two of them both deal with their grief. Yeah, and it's just about how she learns who she is without her sister and how to deal with her grief and the people that she meets on Hawaii and her relationship with her mother and also with her aunt. It is just a really, really good book about coping with grief and about identity, because she finds out that she is asexual and aromantic, but obviously hasn't been able to really put a word to it before and wasn't 100% sure until she sort of tries going on a date with this guy. It's a really good book. It is, obviously does deal with some heavy themes, but it's not a sad book because it is really about her love for her sister and her family, as well as her sort of own identity that she sort of comes into in this book. Yeah, it is just really, really great. Asexual and aromantic representation, and all of the characters that you meet are really, really interesting, and it's just one of my favourite authors and just one of my favourite books. And lastly, I've got Sister Song by Lucy Holland. This is a recent read for me that is about 3 siblings and is a reimagining of an old English folk ballad called The Twa Sisters. And one of the siblings is actually a trans male character, and his journey is not only transitioning from female to male, but also stepping into his own and becoming the heir to the throne and becoming a leader and becoming a magician. I really love this book. Obviously, as I said, the representation, you've got a trans male character, you also have a gender non-conforming witch that turns up, and all 3 siblings are really interesting to follow. You follow Riva, Keen and Sina. They each have their own distinctive personality and voice and their own arc within this story that kind of all connects and all ties together. It's just a really, really good book set in medieval England, sort of 535 AD, and in this sort of trend of retelling fairy tales and retelling folklore, it's interesting to actually see it be a ballad this time instead of an actual story, and being able to just do what the author's able to kind of do a bit more there, because obviously it's a bit more vague and a bit more concise of a story as opposed to an actual story already that you're changing and doing your own thing of. This is a really interesting book, great ideas. I did go into a bit more depth. If you want to watch my May wrap-up video, I did sort of talk a little bit more about all the different things I like, spoiler free, but yeah, that's really, really great and just lives up to its fantastically beautiful cover. So yeah, that's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed this list. Have you read any of the books on this list? Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and also any more recommendations for different books with LGBTQ+ representation in them. The more the merrier, the more books we can read. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. See you next time.